Hey guys, so we're going to switch it up a little bit. We wanted to dive deeper on some of these topics that we've touched on in different podcasts and stuff, because in the middle of these interviews, we don't always have that chance to like get very specific on topics. So today, me and Cam want to talk to you guys about creative financing in real estate and business and different aspects, because it's something that completely changed my life and really got the momentum rolling for me. So Cam has some questions that we're going to try to dive a little bit deeper and provide some value for you guys.
All right. So right off the bat, I'm going to pretend like I know absolutely nothing. Okay. I might know a little bit, but I'm gonna pretend like I know nothing.
Yeah, that's best.
So what are the ways that you can implement? What are ways you can implement creative financing, just for anything
in general?
Yeah.
So, little bit of backstory. I got into creative financing in real estate. Came across videos from a guy named Pace Morby, and they were just random YouTube videos. It interests me because he was talking about wholesaling real estate, which is something else that we can touch on. That's a little bit, it is somewhat part of creative financing, but we can get more in depth on that. But his big thing is creative financing, but it specifically pertains to real estate. Essentially, to like make it very simple to understand, creative financing is the idea that you can take whatever terms make sense for both parties to try to make a deal happen. So there's like 7 or 8 different tools that I've learned of. The traditional route that people go about finding real estate is they find something that's listed from a realtor or on Zillow or whatever, right? It has a purchase price. They contact an agent. The agent says it's this much. They say, okay, well, I'm interested, but then they tell them, well, you got to go get your pre-approval from the bank. You got to get your credit score up. You got to show us the bank statements. You got to blah, 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 blah. Most of that looks like a huge mountain that people like are like, that's impossible to climb, right?
Or deal with.
Yeah. Creative financing is the ability to look at that deal and be like, okay, I don't have to go the traditional route. I have all these other tools that I can use to try to make these deals happen. And they can be, there's on-market deals, which means that it's listed with an agent. It's like on Zillow, on Realtor.com. There's a sign in the yard from a realtor, right? And then there's off-market properties, which is not listed or like for sale by owner. Okay. So that kind of gives you an idea that creative financing, it's a very broad term, and we're going to get into some of those tools specifically, but it just means that you are able to be creative to make deals happen that usually don't look like either you can buy them or they just don't make sense.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay. So why don't we just dive into the first one for homes, pretty much.
Yeah.
So I wrote out 3 situations,
okay.
Each detailing a different stage of life, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
So the first situation is I'm leaving my parents from college or after high school. How do I even begin? Where do I start this journey?
Right. So I wasn't in that exact situation when I found creative financing and stuff. Like I had went the traditional route to buy my first house that I like actually purchased for myself to live in. But the tool that I'm about to talk about is what the first tool that I learned that I think is like the biggest game changer that applied to me then and would apply to somebody in this situation. So that tool is called Subject to. Subject to is not a new thing in real estate, but it has been totally like revamped, or not revamped, but like brought more in the spotlight by Pace Morby. It's like his signature thing. His logo is like this because it's sub 2, but sub 2 means subject to. What subject to means is you are buying something subject to the existing financing that's already in place. So how that works is, and this is all was learned from me from that initial YouTube video, right? I spent literally like 2 or 3 weeks on a nonstop binge of just learning all of it, how to transact these deals, blah, blah, blah. And this was the first deal that was like the game changer for me that I applied this to. Mm-hmm. So what that means is, so let's say that you're that college kid, right? More than likely you don't have credit built. You don't have a job history established. You don't have bank statements showing a reasonable down payment and where it came from, all this stuff.
Right.
In real estate, that's called your credentials, right? Like when you go to a bank and say, I want to buy a house, the first thing they're going to ask you for is all your credentials, credit score, yada, yada, yada.
Mm-hmm.
The person that bought the house that you're looking to buy, like say that there's a house that you're interested in, right? That you've seen off market, on market, doesn't matter. The person that bought that house already gave their bank all those credentials. They got a loan from the bank to buy the house. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the credentials are out of the way for them. What you can do is you can come in and let's say that this person is asking $100,000 for their house, right? They've owned it for 5 or 10 years, whatever. That existing mortgage that they have, you can step in and tell them, hey, I'd like to buy your house for whatever dollar amount, 100,000, 120,000, whatever it is. But I want to purchase it subject to your existing financing that you have in place. Okay? How that looked for me in my first deal was I found a house that was on market listed by an agent. The house wasn't moving, which is usually the best houses to look at for these types of deals.
What do you mean it wasn't moving?
It was sitting on the market and it had been on the market for like 6 months.
Gotcha.
Okay? So basically it wasn't moving, like it wasn't getting offers. It didn't close. Mm-hmm. Nobody's buying it. I contacted the agent and was like, hey, I'm interested in looking at this house. And mind you, when I'm doing this, I don't have the down payment. I don't have all my credentials lined up right because I had already bought a house the traditional route. So like my debt to income and all that stuff was already tied up in this house that I'm living in. So I contact the agent and I tell her, hey, I want to look at the house. I go and look at it. The house is a mess. Okay. Like it was ruined by renters, yada, yada. I ask her what the situation is with the house with the owner. The owner was actually facing foreclosure. So he was behind in payments. He had moved out of state. He just left the house behind and was basically just trying to get the agent to sell the house for what he owed left on the mortgage.
Sure.
I was able to step in. Investors weren't buying this house because there was no money, there was no profit to be made to flip it if you had to buy the house outright, put the money into it, yada, yada. Families weren't buying this house because they didn't want to have to do all the renovations, all that.
Hassle.
Right. So I stepped in and said, hey, let me look at the house. What's the situation? She says he's facing foreclosure. He's behind in payments, all this stuff. I said, well, do you mind if I talk to the seller directly? And then usually an agent's going to like give you some pushback on that and be like, no, you can just deal with me. But because the house hadn't moved, I let her know, like, I might be able to work out something to where you still get paid for representing the house and him. But let me talk to him because I need information from him to see if I can make a deal work. Once he told me what he had left owed on the mortgage, I let him know, like, hey, I can take over that mortgage, right? And I'm going to purchase your house subject to the existing financing you have in place with the bank. I'm going to catch up the back payments. So he had like $3,700, I think, or something like that, owed on the house, like in back payments while he was facing foreclosure. He was like 4 or 5 months behind. So I catch up the back payments. The foreclosure process stops because the bank just wants paid, right? Now I buy his house subject to the existing financing that he has in place. That house specifically, he owed, I think, like $50,000 on it. So now, just to start with, I've bought a house because when you do that, it works just like buying a house the traditional route. The only difference is that when you go to the closing table and you get your HUD statement, do you know what a HUD statement is?
Nope.
So a HUD statement, for anybody that doesn't know, is your settlement statement that you get when you close on a house, and it basically says, like, this is how much you're paying in property taxes, this is how much we took out for this, title work, this is how much your new loan is, this is how much your monthly payment is. It's your breakdown of everything. The main difference with subject to is on that HUD statement, there's a line that says subject to and the loan amount. That's saying you bought this house subject to whatever that balance was on this loan that the other person had. Okay. When you buy it the traditional route, it's like 1 or 2 lines above that says balance of new loan. That's the only difference. Okay. So there is some minor differences in how you transact it, like to get it through title and all that stuff, but we don't have to get that deep into it right now because the main thing is knowing the tool to find the deal.
Sure.
Knowing how to work it.
Wow.
So when you think about it, I just purchased the house because at this point I have the deed, right? I'm the legal owner of this house. The house is transferred in my name. And up to this point, I've spent $3,800. I've not had to show any credentials to anybody. I didn't have to go to his bank and give my taxes and give my bank statements and
You don't have to show him any of the
nothing.
because your deal is only between
Me and him. And he's all.
It's unbelievable.
It's insane. It
Wow.
literally changed my life. So he's already given the credentials to the bank, right? And this isn't going to work for every single situation, but there's a ton of situations it does. We've done a ton of these deals now.
Sure.
So I have spent $3,800 out of pocket. I now own the house, but the question is like, if the house is in disarray and all that stuff, like, and you're saying that there wasn't money for a flipper to buy it, then what were you going to do with it? Well, now I bought the house subject to, right? So I own the house for what he owed on it, and I paid $3,800 out of pocket. A regular flipper that was going to come in, they were going to have to spend the $50,000 that he owed on the loan because he couldn't sell it for less than he owed, right? Or he'd be coming out of pocket to pay for that. He wasn't willing to take anything less than what he owed. That traditional flipper would have to spend $50,000 to buy the house, put the $35,000 into it that we did. So now they have $80,000 invested into this home, right?
Yeah.
That home was going to be worth around like $110,000, $115,000 all fixed up. A traditional flipper is going to look at that and they're going to say, out of $115,000, I know I'm going to have to pay 6% to my realtors when it sells. I'm going to have like 2% in closing costs, all the other little fees and stuff. Usually you're going to take 8 to 10% off the top to cover those costs. Well, now they have $85,000 into it, right? They have $35,000 for the renovation. They have $50,000 for the purchase of the house. Out of that, say, let's call it $110,000. Right. So now you're talking about knocking that down to what, 90-some thousand? So best case scenario, they're maybe making $7,000 or $8,000. Right. Let's call it even $10,000 on an $85,000 investment. Most flippers are not going to take those type of returns.
Right.
The difference is because I bought it subject to, I didn't have to spend the $50,000. I spent $3,800. Right. So now when I spend the same $35,000 for the renovation, my total all in is only $40-some thousand. So I'm able to do the flip and have half the money into the deal that a traditional fix and flipper would have. So if I make $10,000 on $40,000, that's a pretty good return compared to $10,000 on $85,000, $90,000. Wow. Now, this doesn't have to be subject to, is not only for fix and flip deals or anything. It is just to be able to acquire the property subject to existing financing. And we can go through some other scenarios where I've done that with commercial properties. I've done it with houses that don't need any renovation, that we just take over the mortgage. We structured, there's tons of different routes that you can do this. But that's the gist. And how that would apply to this college student is you don't need the credentials.
Right.
Go find a
It's
deal
huge.
that makes sense, which I can go through a bunch of different scenarios a little bit later on too, of this is what subject to deals look like and what to look for to find them. But that's their biggest drawback, right? In that scenario is you don't have credentials. With a subject to deal, you need no credentials. You just need the deal.
That's really unbelievable.
Yeah, it's a game changer.
I've never.
It feels like black magic when you do it, honestly.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
I've been around some of this world for a lot of my life, and I've never heard anything close to that.
I know real estate investors that have been doing real estate for 20, 30 years, have no idea that this exists. Because I spent so much time learning it and how to transact it, and I talked to people that were doing it and title companies that were familiar with it, I knew all the ins and outs as I was getting my first deal, and like I was learning as I was going. I had to teach the title companies that do this every day how to transact the deal, that were trying to tell me, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. I was like, no, you can, and this is how you have to do it. And I was one of the first people around here I know of that was doing subject twos.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there was other people before me, but the people that I know that have been doing this for a long time had no idea. And I've taught it to multiple people, and they're like, that's insane.
It's nuts.
And when you see it on a HUD statement, because people will think like, Well, there has to be something to it. Or it's like a loophole, or it's like some sketchy black market type deal or something. A HUD statement is a legal document that every single house that's sold in the United States gets. It's used by every single bank. It's a federal type of document, right? On that document, it says, I think it's line like 109 or something. It says subject to. So if you need any, or if you have doubts of, is this legal to do? Is there any gray area to it? No, it's on a HUD statement. That's how you know. It's just underutilized and not talked about.
Well, that's one way to kick this off.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I kind of want to stay here and talk about.
We can.
I mean,
dive a little deeper
I wrote
on
out the
subject too.
situations, but this is the lowest. Anyone above this first person can obviously do it, even easier.
So
give us some situations.
I can give you a few situations where subject to makes sense.
Yeah, and also let's hear about what the actual agreement between you and the person looked like.
Yeah, the transacting.
Let's just stay here. I mean, this is obviously big enough. So
yeah. So, do you want to work through the first deal, basically kind of go start to finish on that, or do you want to look at what subject to deals look like, or could look like, I should say?
Let's do what subject to deals look like, and then come back to the story.
Okay. So, when I'm looking for a deal that might be a good fit for subject to, the first things that I'm looking at usually are deals that have sat on the market for a while. Because one, you know that person's motivated to sell because they're already trying to sell, right? Two, you know that there's some type of issue with the house, whether that means that they are asking too much for it, it has a lot of renovations that it needs, there's something wrong or the house would sell. Right. So to me, that gives some leverage. Your house already isn't moving. When I come to the table, say that you were selling your house and you had 10 offers on the table in the first week. You're not going to consider some creative financing deal for me when you're like, no, I don't want to have to go through all that. I'll just sell it to this guy. Right. But these people, once it's set for a little while, they're going to get antsy. They're going to be like, whoa, I might have an issue selling this. So if you come to the table trying to offer any deal, usually they're going to listen. Right. So I look at ones that have set on the market. I also like looking at properties that are abandoned. So, and it doesn't have to be close to being boarded up or whatever, but just houses that have tall grass, houses that look like they're not being kept up well, different stuff like that are off market. So they're not listed with an agent or anything like that.
Where would you find those? Just on a...
Go door knock. Literally drive around. And if you see a house that has big overgrown grass or looks like maybe that somebody doesn't live there or whatever, door knock.
Jeez.
Leave your number on their door. There's tons of tools online that you can look to just punch in an address and pull somebody's information to try to call them. And then the other one that I personally look for, and right now we're just talking residential real estate.
Yep.
So the other thing that I look for is my end strategy with subject twos are usually to rent them out, right?
Gotcha. So you're looking for rentable locations.
I'm looking for rentable locations that are in good neighborhoods that I know will bring me good cash flow.
I see.
Right. So those are the places that I'm usually looking. So the first one, when they've sat on the market for a while, let's say that the house does need renovations. I want to do subject twos where I can keep that mortgage as long as possible. Because when you bring a subject to on, say that you bring it on, you fix and flip it, right? Yeah, you're going to make some money up front. But to me, the huge benefit is when you can get a 30-year fixed mortgage on a property that you don't have to put credentials on, that you don't have to go through the hassle, jump through all the hoops with the bank and stuff. I want to hold those mortgages as long as I possibly can. Right? So I'm usually going to look at even the ones that with renovations. How can I buy this subject to, renovate it, and rent it out? Put it on Airbnb.
Oh, wow. And then you don't even have to. So with such a low mortgage payment, if you just rent it out.
And what that looks like is, so there's a house that we purchased. We bought it subject to. Okay. This house was on market. The lady was asking, honestly, like a little bit more than the house was probably worth, and that's why it wasn't moving.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, because my cost to purchase the house is so minimal, because I'm not having to put the huge down payments that the bank requires, I'm not having to just jump through all those hoops, right?
Right.
I strictly am looking at cash flow. Can I cash flow this property, meaning whatever that house is going to cost me, can I bring in more than that per month if I have it as a traditional rental, if I rent it out to college students by the bedroom, if I make it an Airbnb, if I turn it into office space? Is there a way for me to make that property generate enough money to cover my expenses and cash flow? Because at the end of the day, my goal with subject twos specifically, I want to hold the 30-year mortgage for that whole 30 years. I want to put a tenant in there that's going to pay that mortgage down completely to where in 30 years, I now have a property that's worth $200,000, $300,000, $600,000 that I've essentially spent no money on.
Right.
It hasn't tied up my debt to income. It hasn't done any. It's sat on my balance sheet and made money.
That's crazy about the debt to income thing because, you know, as I'm getting more and more into just the thorns and thistles of life,
Mm-hmm.
it's like another debt in general is just another tool in a way.
Oh,
but
is.
it can be exhausted. You know what I mean? And coming out of college, to some degree, it's decently exhausted.
Especially if you're looking at this and listening to this right now. If you're looking at it like, how can I buy my first house for me to live in? Cool. Do a subject two, you're good. Like do one and you're done. If you're looking at this as, well, I might want to use real estate to make money. If you go and buy a rental property right now, you have to let that rental property season for usually at least 2 years and show that it's making money before a bank is going to lend you more money to buy another rental property, right? Because you can only hold so much debt compared to your income
Right.
in general. If you're looking at subject to, I can go buy literally 500 houses subject to, and nobody can tell me that I can't. Nobody's going to look at my debt to income and be like, well, you don't make enough money to be able to service this debt. You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's like you're cutting the whole second half of the game away.
Yeah.
I mean,
The hardest part of the
the
game.
hardest part of the game.
People want to sell houses and people want to buy houses. The banks and stuff are what muddy it all up and make it difficult.
Right. Yeah, this is going to take a second to sit in.
Yeah. Well, so with the scenario of like cash flow though, right? So what that house looked like was the lady had it on market. She wanted a little bit more than it was probably worth, right? But she did have equity in that property. Okay. So equity is just how much is owed on it versus how much it's worth.
Mm-hmm.
If you owe $100,000 and your house is worth $200,000, you have $100,000 in equity, right? She had an insane low interest rate because she had got the house at the bottom of interest rates a few years ago when they were under 3%, which is another huge benefit to subject to. I don't care what happens to interest rates.
Right.
I can find the interest rates from 10 years ago, or not 10 years ago because they sucked then, but from 3 years ago when they bottomed out, I can find deals with those interest rates.
Unbelievable.
I can still get them when people that go buy the house now, they have to pay whatever today's interest rate is.
Right.
Right. So she had a crazy low interest rate. My thinking when I see stuff like that is I'm going to do just about whatever as long as I can cash flow this property, even if I'm cash flowing minimal to get this deal, because my interest rate is so low that all these payments are just going to be paying down this principal. Okay. So she had around $80,000, I believe, in equity. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was around $80,000. What we ended up doing was structuring a deal with her to where I took over her crazy low interest or her crazy low mortgage payment because her interest was so low. The payment was disgustingly low. Like for the house that it was sick how low it was. People pay more for one bedroom apartments than I pay for this 3,200 square foot house. So I knew that I had a lot of room in my cash flow, right? Because even though her mortgage payment was low, rents are still high. The house is awesome. It's in a great neighborhood. I know I can rent it for a ton. So I have a huge gap in my cash flow to play with. So what I did was I structured a deal with her because she just wanted out of the house, wanted to move on with her life and do her own thing. So I structured a deal with her to where your equity that you would get if you sold this house, how about you get every penny that you're looking for? That price that you're wanting to sell it for on market, I'm not even going to beat you up on it. I'm not going to fight you on the price, right? But the way that we're going to get to that price is I'm going to take over your mortgage and I'm going to start making those payments. I'm just going to pick up where you left off. So she's already paid this down a good chunk at this point. I get to pick up your mortgage and finish off that 30 years. And then the equity that you have in it, I'll give you a small amount down, but I'll pay you X amount over X period of time. And that's paying down your equity. So the huge kicker with that is now that house let's just call it $250,000 that she was asking for it. If I go get it from the bank, my interest rate's 8-9%, whatever it is. And when I start making those payments on that $250,000, I'm paying tons of interest because of how amortization works. You're paying interest, principal, interest, and then you get 15 years in and then you start paying a little more principal, right? So when I'm paying her the equity every month, I'm paying 100% principal payments. Because say she's asking for $250 and I say, yeah, cool, let's do $250. $250 is a great number. I'm cool with that, but let's structure it this way. That $80,000 that you have in equity though, I'm going to, let's say $5,000 down in your pocket today, and then we're going to pay you $1,700 a month for the next 5, 6, 7 years, whatever that number is, right? To pay off your $80,000. But now
at the same time.
Oh yeah.
So both payments are happening at the same time.
Correct.
So you're paying off.
I'm paying the mortgage each month and
Right.
I'm paying her equity each month.
Okay.
But because the house is in such a good neighborhood, my mortgage payment's so low, my rent's so high, I have a huge cash flow to play with, right?
So you're still probably making profit off that house.
I'm still cash flowing. Instead of cash flowing, let's say $2,000 a month, I'm cash flowing $400 a month. But who cares? I'm paying 100% principal down, right? So instead of it taking me 10 years to build $50,000, $60,000 worth of equity in a property, like it takes most people because you have to pay off all that interest up front, I'm getting equity every single month because I'm paying 100% principal payments on her equity, on top of the fact that I'm building equity in my low mortgage payment because her interest is so low, right? So with that house, that was just one that we end up renting out, right? We ended up doing it by the bedroom and whatever. But I didn't have to do renovations because it's a nice house, so I don't have that cost. I get me a property manager. I say, fill it up. They bring in the tenants. My cash flow goes from here to here, but my long game is through the roof.
Sure.
I spend $5,000 and get a $250,000 property that I'm at under 3% interest on a 30-year fixed mortgage, and I get to pay the equity down over time, so it never comes out of my pocket. It just comes out of the cash flow from the tenants, and I build equity crazy fast for my balance sheet. So when I go to a bank and I look for more financing or whatever, they're like, oh, you have $150,000 of equity in this property? Like, we'll loan you $60,000 right now to use as a down payment to go buy an apartment complex.
Oh my gosh.
You know what I'm saying? It's huge. And when I tell you that is one example, that is one example. Subject to just allows you to know that you can buy something with the existing financing in place, whether that be a house, a commercial property, whatever it is, and then structure a way to figure out the rest. Because that deal, it is subject to, but it's technically, like in the industry, it's called like a hybrid deal because you're marrying something with the subject to, but still subject to is the core of it.
So I'm going to try to break the game a little bit.
Yeah.
Because the way I'm thinking about it is, who's to say I don't have a rich friend? Mm-hmm. All right, homie, I need you to buy this house for me. And then I'm just going to subject to you.
I did it.
It can't be that easy though.
I did it. I literally, we got a deal, right? It was a fixer upper. We got it subject to. We put the money in the renovation. We ended up refinancing it and putting a renter in there just because we wanted to get all the renovation money back out, because the renovation went from like very small to huge. So we ended up refinancing it, right? We get the renovation money back out, but we still had so much equity because usually we can refinance at like 70% of whatever the house is worth, we can get back out in cash, right? To cash out refinance. The bank that we were using, and we needed that capital to keep moving with deals. The bank that we were using last second tells us, hey, we can only do 50% loan to value. Whatever the house is worth, we'll give you 50% only back out. So we end up having a bunch of capital. Like, this house was massive and it was a huge high-end renovation. We have a bunch of capital tied up in this house. So instead, all we do is we find a buyer for the house, they buy the house, and then we circle back and it's like, hey, what if we subject to purchase this back from you and you got to make some money from that too? So we did. We got all of our money back because we got to sell the house, and then we circled back. So it's...
So what was the time
endless.
period?
That entire transaction took a year and a half. But that was because the renovation took 4 months.
Sure.
The refinance took another month and a half. The person purchased it. We didn't circle back to them for however long. But yeah.
Wow. And so were they already familiar with you because you had done the renovations on the house and sold them the house?
Mm-hmm. And they weren't looking at the house to live in. They didn't want to like move into it.
Okay.
They had other plans for it.
So they were in the game as well.
Yeah. But they had other plans for it.
Wow. Okay, so I guess let's dive into, and this might be the last part of this episode. I'm not sure.
Subject 2 is deep, buddy.
Yeah,
I can go real deep on subject 2.
How much deeper?
Oh, it gets deep. Because, so the best way I can explain it is, if you think about a tool belt, right? Most people, when they go to buy a house, they have one tool in their tool belt, traditional route. Go to a bank, ask for money, give them credentials, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
My tool belt has at minimum 7 tools in it when I go look at any deal. Meaning I can go traditional route, I can go subject 2, I have novations, I have wraps, I have land contracts, I have all of these different tools that all are different things similar to this that allow me to make deals happen. So if one tool doesn't work to get the job done, I have another tool I can use to get the job done. I have a different tool that I can try. So when I'm going to a deal, if there's a deal to be made, usually I can find a way to make that deal happen and it'd be beneficial for both parties. But only because I've learned all these different tools, you know. But subject 2, the reason I said that is because subject 2 as its own tool is deep enough in itself. But all these other 6 tools in the tool belt, subject 2 can marry with them as hybrid deals to where my novation, which is a whole different topic, but my novation can start as a subject 2, turn into a novation, and make the deal happen that way. This can be married with that to, you know what I'm saying?
Yes,
to mix and match and play with the deal.
So why don't we do these episodes?
But I think subject 2 is in itself a good starting point for just a singular episode of subject 2 and the intro to what subject 2 is.
Right. So let's do these episodes on creative financing according to the tools. So this can be,
we can do that.
This can be subject to, this episode will be subject to, I don't know, intro. Yeah.
And I think that it would be really beneficial for people too is go through subject to intro. Let's dive into subject to deals, give in-depth examples of deals and what they look like and how we close them. And then the last piece for each one would be subject to transacting, because how to actually talk to you as the seller, come to a verbal agreement, but then get the title companies, the banks, the realtors, all that stuff on board to actually make that deal happen is a whole nother thing in itself, and is where most people trip in the deal and aren't able to like actually get it closed.
Gotcha.
But I think that would be a good process for people. So then the next one would be novation intro, novation deals, and then novation transacting.
Okay. I like that. Okay, so is there
I can't tell you enough, man. This changed my life. It was a
it's about to change mine.
Yeah, it was a 3-week YouTube binge from watching Jerry Norton, who talks about wholesaling real estate, which is a whole nother thing that we can do, because that's more about how to make money in real estate using no money, but it's not about owning properties. But it is how you could start making money to get down payments to own properties, and you don't have to have any money to start. Like literally zero. You need a phone and the internet. That is it.
It's freaking crazy.
It's a game changer, man. And obviously,
It's only a
we
lack of
started in
knowledge.
real estate, but it was our small snowball that turned into obviously a bigger snowball and got us momentum. But the big thing is that now being in different avenues of business, I still use creative financing in other aspects of business. Like if I'm looking at, hey, how can we acquire this other cell phone shop?
Mm-hmm.
I know I don't have to offer them what they're asking for. I know I can come up with some type of creative deal that makes it work. You know what I mean?
You're just cutting out the middleman.
It seriously has helped in so many different aspects of just dealing with investors, making deals happen. It's pretty huge.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So
Pace Morby's made an entire career almost just out of Subject 2.
I can see how, or I can see why.
And it's a
Seems
pretty
lethal.
big career. He has a ton of different tools now, and he's a really big investor. But
So is there any last things that should be said, intro for Subject 2 wise?
honestly, if I had to say one action item that somebody could take, would be go on YouTube, go to Pace Morby. That's PACEMORBY. He has a thing called Subject 2. He does try to sell you a training course and all this stuff. I didn't buy it. I actually ended up getting in Facebook groups and found somebody that had purchased it and piggybacked off theirs and whatever.
Nice.
Just because there's no way I'm never paying you $10,000 for
Nope.
some video courses when I don't know what it is. But I would say if you got on YouTube, looked at Pace Morby Subject 2, or just Subject 2 real estate and how it works on YouTube, there is a ton of information to at least get your wheels turning on the concept around it. And then come back here and hopefully we can tell people in more detail and maybe take questions and provide answers.
I think that's a great idea. Well, that was unbelievable, and hopefully it gets
sorry
better.
to make your mind explode so early in the morning.
I mean, it was just what I was looking for. I mean,
I'm excited
I don't know.
for your journey to find a house and how we can use some of these tools to help you get your first house.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's like kryptonite.
Super possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this. Hopefully this provided a ton of value for you. If you guys do have more questions on these, our plan is to start getting into some series where we dive deep on the things that we've learned, the things that we haven't had time to really get into during the podcast and stuff. But I don't know how often we plan on dropping these, but I know we want to start shooting them a lot. But let us know, if this is something that you guys want to see more of, what specifically you would like to see more of. But creative financing changed my life, so I'm so excited to be able to share that with you guys and hopefully see it work in your lives as well.
All right.
Good.
Make your last name mean something.
Always.